Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much, first of all, to everyone at the Big Co for letting us do this project, because the team at Urbis have had so much fun for the last 12 months. It's true, there were many days where it was more like, oh my God, it's that bloody Jace Tyrrell on the phone again. But it's only because he cared so much. And we're glad you did, because we're pretty proud of the work that we did. So I thought that we might just, in 10 minutes, have a really quick look at some of the research work that we've done, because the most important starting point for us was to try to understand if our ambition was lofty of having a world-class waterfront, what did that really mean, and are we not actually one already? So for all time, waterfronts have actually been essential to the growth of cities. And there's a Scottish economist, Adam Smith, and about 250 years ago, he said that waterfronts were essential to the wealth of nations. And at that time, they were industrial, they were trade entrepôts, and he certainly wouldn't have imagined them the way that they are today. But when we think about the centrality of a waterfront to conveying our identity, our soul, our vibrancy, to helping us make our city more livable, if we think about how it attracts talent, everything that the minister spoke about, then actually they remain as essential today, just in a slightly different way. And I think that one of the things that was important to us when we started out on this journey was to not make any assumptions. So it's a bit difficult here because I can only see a rainbow down on that slide, and I have to kind of hope that the slides behind me match what I'm saying. Otherwise, I'll be turning around all the time. Our starting point was that a world-class waterfront doesn't just happen, and actually it's a really conscious endeavour. It's something you have to really work at, and that it's not the job of any one person. So although leadership is a really important critical success factor, everyone in this room is actually a leader, and everyone in this room has an important role to play in making sure that the waterfront that we've got today becomes even more world-class into the future. But we do have this opportunity to think about how we might set a new benchmark, what things are now important to us that maybe 25 years ago we hadn't considered. So how can we really go on this journey of investigation and inquiry to understand what other people in different parts of the world are doing with respect to their waterfronts? And how might that influence what we choose to do here collectively and individually? So we went on a massive waterfront hunt, and there were about 60 waterfronts that we started out with, and we narrowed the field down to 30, and then we narrowed the field down again to about 10. So if your favourite waterfront is not in this list, I'm very sorry, and we're very happy for a variation, we'll add it to it. But what we tried to do was to say that waterfronts do come in so many different varieties. They can be extremely urban, or they can be semi-urban, or they can be regional. They can be in warm water, they can be in cold water, they can be working water, or they can be a recreational asset. And we've tried to create a bit of a smorgasbord of all of them and see what it is that we can bubble to the surface that tells us how to make a waterfront great and how to keep it great. We also tried to imagine what it would feel like to be told that waterfronts that you had loved and sweated over were not great. So we've not got any kind of ranking here. All waterfronts are equal because effectively they're all on their own adventure. And that was really our most important starting point, was to understand that we want to be deliberate and intentional. We need to recognise that the waterfront is actually part of our urban capital. And it has a really important value proposition to play in accelerating and amplifying other outcomes that are very important to the city. Some of those outcomes are social outcomes, and some of the outcomes are economic, and increasingly, many of the outcomes are also environmental. But if we don't understand that just add a waterfront to some of these other forms of urban outcome is going to allow us to create even more, then we're kind of missing the point. So it was very important to recognise how we could use this as a catalyst or a lever to achieve other things which are important to our city from a policy perspective or from a lived experience. From the study, we had a number of overarching conclusions and some very specific recommendations. We're just going to hit the high spots today. And I guess that the first thing that we really understood was that every city is on its own adventure, and that the solution that is originated in Toronto, where I've just come back from, would not be a great fit for Sydney, and what we do here might not work in Gothenburg or Huffington City, Hamburg. That actually every waterfront has to be the zeitgeist of its own city, capture its own story, its own sense of place. It's its own adventure. So therefore, although we can learn from lots of other places, we need to come back to understanding how what we have learned is fed into a principle that enables us to perform better. And it would be remiss not to start by recognising that our waterfront has a very important story, and that it is an irreplaceable cultural asset, that it's a place for the Gadigal and Wongal and other Indigenous peoples that has such deep significance and meaning, that its authenticity is grounded in what has always been important to these people and always will be. that it's a place where we come together, where we share knowledge, where we share ceremony, where we celebrate, and also pretty important for food. So we're lucky that we have this incredible grounding and foundation that we can build on when we think about our waterfront. And coincidentally, I was having a look through some of the many layers of government policy that are set across the waterfront, and it suggests to me we've actually got about 214 linear kilometres of waterfront that we deal with. So we're only looking at a little bit of that in the bid, but it sits within a much broader context that we mustn't forget. And that context is also quite contested and it's very complex. So we've got a number of ecosystems that converge here. We've got environmental ecosystems, we've got social ecosystems, we're a working harbour, we're a tourism resort, we face the world like a postcard, but we're our own backyard. So how we reconcile all those elements is actually really important as well. And how they come together is the most important part of all, like making a great cake, because the outcome has to be something that builds the inclusivity of Sydney, the inimitability of Sydney, and ultimately the investability of Sydney. So if we don't get it right, then these three things are not going to work to their full advantage. So the next thing, thank you very much, gentlemen on the sound and visual desk, who's managed to put my slides up down there. That's much easier for me to see. Thank you. So I think it's also important to say we are actually already world-class in many respects. In other respects, there's lots of room for improvement. And it was actually quite entertaining to be at an international symposium on waterfronts in Toronto a few weeks ago and have people say, oh my God, I can't actually do a Canadian accent, so I won't bother. And there might be a real bona fide Canadian person in the room, it would be a big mistake. But they were basically saying that from the other side of the world, they look to Sydney as best in breed, absolutely the best of all waterfronts. And I'm laughing because we're sitting here saying, oh my goodness, they're doing everything in Toronto, it's spectacular. So there's this kind of beautiful irony that we're all curious about what we're doing and there is a massive agenda about sharing knowledge and information. So if any of you do get the opportunity to go to Toronto in the near future, big ambition, small on delivery. I think we are actually way ahead and their waterfront is nowhere near as beautiful as ours, but that's a valued judgment. What is important is we get the opportunity to make a new statement about what we want our waterfront to be about and how we want it to epitomise the values of our city, because we're a pretty unique place in the world. So because we can't possibly hit all the headlines, I thought that we might just share a few of the things that we observed across all of the different case studies. And I'm sure the report is available for you to read, and if not, I'll happily come and walk you through it myself. So what we saw was that deep intentionality really matters, and that an understanding that we need... I really like this gentleman over here. Yes, you, sir, because you're actually reading and your lips are moving. That made me feel very good about myself. Waterfronts need to be deeply intentional. They are actually being positioned as a value creator. So it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everything we do here costs money. Actually, everything we do here creates value socially, environmentally, culturally, economically for the city and for the wider New South Wales state. That it's a collective endeavour. Again, we all have our own fiefdom, we're all paid with our own paymasters, but ultimately this is something we all get to contribute to. And we don't get to a point of excellence simply by each doing our own individual excellent thing excellently. We actually have to work together to make sure that the spaces between each of these excellent things are even more excellent, so that the sum of the parts is really realised. We need to make sure that we get balanced outcomes, that we recognise the importance of having space to breathe, points of intense excitement, places that create profit, places that are for purpose, places of commerce and places of community. And that balance is very delicate, and it may not be the same throughout the year or even within a singular place every time that you visit. We need to make sure that we have this powerful overarching view of what success looks like as a touchstone that we're all going to contribute to. Because if we don't have that, then we're all expending enormous amounts of energy walking towards different outcomes, and that's clearly not very sensible. We need to have long-term thinking. I think about that as a long-term love affair, because we're not going to fix anything, build anything, create anything, curate anything, activate anything, or be the custodian of anything just for a few months, even a couple of years. This is a lifelong commitment that we're making to our waterfront. And we need to make sure that at the heart of this, we don't see it as a competitive thing, it's a collaborative thing. So it's something that we need to wrap the appropriate governance around and understand how we're able to unify all of our endeavours collectively. And it was very interesting listening to many of the things that the Minister said earlier on, and I thought, thank goodness I've got the next slide in my pack, because I think one of the most important things that the waterfront can do for us is it sets out a stall that tells people what our city is about. It tells them what our story is. It tells them about our values, our identity, how we live our life. What we would like people to believe to be true about us is embodied in our waterfront. It needs to be a place that is a series of places joined together, locally loved, very meaningful, Good job Annie Tennant is in the room. She hates the word authentic, but I was about to use it. It has to be an authentic place that represents us as we are and as we wish to be seen. It needs to be a place that eschews homogeneity. It needs to be individualistic, charismatic, its own place. Surface the things about us which are the most special and the most unique. It needs to have clarity of purpose, and actually it just needs to have clarity. So you need to understand how you move between the sum of those parts to make sure that as you package your day, you're able to see what it is you can do here, and yet you're encouraged to discover what's just around the corner. And that those special places are connected by many, many different forms of accessibility, so that we can walk between them, we can take a boat, we can ride a bike, we can take the train. And that we're creating places that have incredible, endless imagination, boundless potential to support our well-being, to be active, to be healthy places, to be places of culture, places of reflection, places of storytelling. We are inherently creating places of exuberance and equally places that allow us from time to time to be introspective. So where do we get to? You can find it on the table, a series of principles that might extract some of these lofty ideals, critical success factors, and